Here in Germany, a court has sentenced one of the world's most prolific serial killers to life in prison. Former hospital nurse Nils Högel has been found guilty of killing 85 patients in his care. Prosecutors said that he deliberately induced cardiac arrest in patients so that he could then resuscitate them and impress his colleagues. But many of Högel's interventions failed and patients died. He had already been serving a life sentence for 2 previous murder convictions from his killing spree, which lasted from 2000 until 2005. We're joined now by our correspondent Marielle Müller, who is at the courthouse today. So, first of all, how did he react? And also the relatives who were also there in the courtroom.
Well, Nils Högel, he seemed very quiet and calm. He didn't show any of his emotions. He was pretty emotionless, actually. That was his behavior throughout the whole trial. Only yesterday he read a written statement saying that he felt sorry and ashamed and that he hopes that the families would find peace at some point. But I talked to members of these families and they told me, no, we can't believe any of what he's saying. He has proven too many times throughout the trial that he is a constant liar. Yes. Yeah, the victims' families' reactions. Actually, they were pretty sad, pretty upset during the reading of the verdict. They even had to leave the courtroom to console each other.
Marielle, just walk us through here, because, I mean, he was convicted of murder, but the court also accepted the fact that he wanted to save the patients.
Yes, so Nils Högel injected medicine to his patients in the first place, which may kill them, so that then he could come to the scene and be the big hero, to reanimate them and to save them, actually. But a lot of times it didn't work, so they just died, and he was fully aware of that. He actually used his patients only to make himself better and to make himself feel better. So also that was the motivation behind it, and that's also why Judge Böhmann said that there is a particular sense of guilt which is given. That means that after 15 years of jail, he might have to stay longer in prison. And if you compare it, for example, to the US, there were 85 murders, and for each murder, 15 years, that would make 1,270 years. So this particular, guilt, which is here, I also talked about this feeling of how it is to work with this kind of person for a long time. To Frank Laukstermann, a former colleague, I met him a couple of days ago. Take a look.
Frank Laukstermann still reflects on the time working alongside Nils Högel. The former nurse was his colleague for 2 years at the main clinic in Oldenburg. Laukstermann quickly became aware that there was something wrong with Högel.
It was obvious he wanted to be the action hero who saved people. You sometimes get that. People who work in rescue services who are under the illusion that they're the big heroes. Högel is one of those.
Laukstermann only became suspicious after around a year and a half. That's when he started to notice that patients would suffer cardiac arrests more often when Högel was on duty.
At first, we just thought it was bad luck, until a colleague said, "So Death Högel, on duty again?"
Despite rumors circulating, neither Laukstermann nor any of his colleagues reported it to the police. He did tell his superior about it, though, when he noticed that a patient had elevated levels of potassium in his blood. But there was no consequences. It was later discovered that Högel would inject patients with potassium in order to bring on cardiac arrests, so that he could reanimate them and appear as the great life-saving hero. Again and again. And then on a single weekend on Högel's shift there were 14 resuscitations and 5 deaths. And yet Högel was simply transferred to another ward.
The reason why a clinic director, a chief physician, or a nursing director stays silent is to prevent the reputational damage to the clinic. Because we all know that that would mean fewer patients coming into our care.
It took several further resuscitations in the new ward for the head of the clinic to decide that Högel had to go. Now the nurse is alleged to have killed 36 people by this point. He was dismissed from his post with glowing references. He then applied for a job at a clinic in Delmenhorst, just a few kilometers away, where he continued to murder unabated. 64 more patients were to die at Högel's hand there. Christian Marbach's grandfather was one of his victims. He underwent a gastrointestinal operation. Shortly before he was to be released, he suddenly suffered a cardiac arrest.
My grandfather was resuscitated by the murderer, and then, 2 or 3 days later, the same thing happened again. So he was practically murdered twice.
In 2005, Högl was finally caught red-handed as he was about to administer an injection to a patient. It was the end of a killing spree, unprecedented in Germany. A nurse who doesn't help sick people, but secretly murders them, possibly in more than 100 cases.
In reaching these verdicts, we have achieved as much transparency as is legally possible. The hope now is that many of the relatives find peace.
Still, the legal proceedings have not yet been completed. Fellow nurses, doctors, supervisors, who among them was complicit in Nils Högl's crimes? The investigations are ongoing.
So, Muriel, tell us a little bit more then about those investigations. Who exactly is being investigated and for what?
So for now, charges have been filed against 2 doctors, 1 nursing director and his deputy. And the accusation is that they knew what Nils Högl was doing. They knew that he was actively killing patients, and they didn't stop him, they didn't intervene, so that he could further kill even more and continue his killing spree. The Judge Bührmann clearly said that he also had the feeling that there was a cover-up. So during the trial, when he was asking witnesses, they wouldn't answer, in a way which was credible to him. So now 4 witnesses are actually also facing trial for perjury. And so the question still remains, who knew what, on which level of hierarchy in these 2 clinics? This is up to investigators to determine.
Maria Müller in Oldenburg, thank you.
85 patients and sentenced to life in prison. 42-year-old Nils Högl enjoyed intentionally placing patients into cardiac arrest and then resuscitating them, with the killings taking place at 2 hospitals in northwestern Germany between 2000 and 2005, according to the DPA news agency. He was tried on 100 counts of murder but was convicted on 85 of them, with the court finding him not guilty of the other 15 due to a lack of evidence. Högl was previously sentenced to life in prison after being convicted of 2 murders and 2 attempted murders in 2015. And after admitting there were more patients, hundreds of deaths were investigated. Now he's believed to be Germany's worst serial killer in modern history, with the judge pointing to particular seriousness of the crimes when sharing the verdict. That ruling suggests Högl will almost certainly remain behind bars after the standard 15-year term has concluded, despite the absence of consecutive sentences in the country's legal system.
Patience, a former nurse, has been convicted of murdering 85 patients at 2 hospitals in northern Germany and handed a life sentence. Judge Sebastian Bührmann described Nils Högl's killing spree as incomprehensible. Högl, who is already serving life for 2 murders, administered lethal doses of heart medication to people in his care between 1999 and 2005. He is believed to be the most prolific killer in Germany's modern history. Prosecutors said he attacked patients in order to impress colleagues by subsequently trying to revive them. A former colleague told the German newspaper Bild that Högl was nicknamed Resuscitation Rambo because of the way he pushed everyone else aside when patients needed to be resuscitated. On the last day of his trial, Högl, 42, asked the families of his victims for forgiveness for his horrible acts. "I would like to sincerely apologize for everything I did to you over the course of years," he said. Högl had been accused of murdering 100 patients in the northern cities of Delmenhorst and Oldenburg. Police believe he may have killed far more, but the cremation of bodies had destroyed any possible evidence. Högl had confessed to 55 murders and the court in Oldenburg convicted him of 85, German media reported. Delivering sentence, Judge Bührmann expressed regret that the court had not been able to lift the fog for many grieving relatives. The BBC's Jenny Hill in Berlin says the case has shocked Germany, not least because senior staff at the 2 hospitals are accused of having turned a blind eye to unusually high mortality rates. Högl's killing spree was stopped when he was caught in the act of administering unprescribed medication to a patient in 2005 in Delmenhorst. He was sentenced to 7 years for attempted murder in 2008, but the families of his other suspected victims pressed for a further investigation. At a second trial that ended in 2015, he was jailed for life for 2 murders and 2 attempted murders. However, during that trial he confessed to a psychiatrist that he had killed up to 30 people. Investigators then widened the investigation, exhuming 130 former patients and looking for evidence of medication that could have triggered cardiac arrest. They also pored over records in the hospitals he worked at. Records at the Oldenburg Hospital showed rates of deaths and resuscitations had more than doubled when Högl was on shift, German media said. Script taken from BBC News. Thanks for watching.